In 1969, the last episode of Star Trek had aired, and the show had been cancelled. Despite the show having built up a passionate and loyal fan base, its overall viewing figures and troublesome behind-the-scenes antics led distributor NBC to discontinue the show. Its creative team and cast had moved on to other projects. They were happy to leave what they saw as a good series which unfortunately had never achieved the success it perhaps deserved. Going into the 70s, however, few were expecting the name Star Trek to come back into the popular consciousness. Against all the odds, however, it did just that. In part 1 of this series, we mentioned how Star Trek as a series was owned by Desilu Productions and filmed at their studios. However, 7 years as sole owner and CEO, Lucille Ball, who had co-founded the studio, sold the company to Gulf Western, a large conglomerate which at the time had also recently acquired Paramount Pictures. Desilu Productions was then renamed Paramount Television. During the first season of Star Trek, syndication rights were picked up by Kaiser Broadcasting, with its vice president Richard Bloch apparently being quite the fan. Although shows at the time usually required 4 seasons of episodes for syndication, the rights were already purchased before cancellation, and so Kaiser Broadcasting began rerunning several episodes on local city stations. While NBC had doomed the show to the 10 PM Friday night time slot of death, Kaiser Broadcasting gave the show a much more suitable weekday evening slot of 6 PM, effective counter-programming while other large networks ran their news programs. This deal paid off in droves and ratings were strong, prompting other stations to purchase the syndication rights for themselves. By the early 1970s, Star Trek not only reclaimed its original audience, but amassed millions more new fans. It quickly became one of Paramount Television's most profitable shows, scoring high ratings across the USA and even in other countries. It had gone from a financial flop to a cult hit. The original fanbase eventually attended the very first Star Trek convention in New York City in January of 1972. After this, the term Trekkies, coined by science fiction editor Arthur W. Saha, rose in use to refer to the dedicated and often ridiculed fans. The rise in popularity led to the commission of Star Trek the Animated Series in 1973, which saw several unused scripts from the original show repurposed for animated installments. The early 70s also saw a slew of Star Trek toys and merchandise released. While the Mego Corporation did produce a line of well-received action figures, some merchandise from other companies were a little ridiculous, such as the infamous Star Trek helmet. Quite impressively, however, the widespread passion around Star Trek eventually led to the very first NASA space shuttle being renamed from Constitution to Enterprise, thanks once again to a fierce letter-writing campaign from Trekkies, this time not to a network executive, but to the President of the United States, Gerald Ford. Roddenberry and the cast of Star Trek attended the shuttle's first rollout ceremony, with its new name adorning the side. As Star Trek's popularity continued to rise, the concept of a Star Trek movie entered development. The idea of a Star Trek movie was first proposed by Gene Roddenberry as early as 1968, when the original show was still airing, during the World Science Fiction Convention. Spurred on by the enthusiastic fan campaigns which successfully got the show renewed for a second season, Roddenberry proposed a prequel which would tell the story of how the Enterprise crew met for the first time. This, however, never got off the ground. By 1975, however, Star Trek was a valuable commodity for Paramount, and so Roddenberry was given the chance to return to the franchise and develop a feature film. Roddenberry's first idea was a story he titled The God Thing. The story followed a now Admiral Kirk who reassembles his old crew when a godlike alien entity many miles across is seen hurtling towards the Earth. The entity would eventually be revealed as an artificial intelligence sent from another dimension, which Kirk would eventually return back to its home, and the Enterprise would resume exploring space for further adventures. The initial script, however, wasn't well received by Paramount, and they fielded ideas from other creatives, such as acclaimed science fiction author Ray Bradbury, Theodore Sturgeon, and Harlan Ellison, who had previously penned the Star Trek episode City on the Edge of Forever, often regarded as one of the very best of the original show. Ellison's script featured a reptilian race attempting to interfere with Earth history by creating a hybrid species which would supplant humanity. Allegedly, when a Paramount executive compared his idea to Chariots of the Gods, Ellison was enraged and withdrew from the project. Another idea from writers Robert Silverberg and John D. F. Black saw a black hole which threatened to consume all of existence. Roddenberry then teamed up with writer John Povil and proposed the idea of the Enterprise crew correcting an altered universe using time travel. Both ideas were rejected by Paramount. As more ideas continued to be thought up and rejected, a massive list of names was given over to Paramount to source potential writers and directors who could handle the project. Among these names were Francis Ford Coppola, George Lucas, and Steven Spielberg. While hindsight is 2020, at the time only Coppola had a true hit to his name. Lucas would be mostly known for THX 1138, and Spielberg was yet to make Jaws or Close Encounters of the Third Kind. After dozens of concepts and ideas, eventually one proposal did begin building steam. Writers Chris Bryant and Alan Scott's 20-page treatment entitled Planet of the Titans, to be directed by Philip Kaufman, who would later go on to direct the 1978 version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which featured Leonard Nimoy opposite Donald Sutherland. Planet of the Titans would see the Enterprise crew encounter a mythical and powerful alien race, and eventually travel back millions of years and kick off humanity's own evolution. This film was said to have some truly far-out ideas, toying with the concept of the third eye and other New Age movement elements. At one point in development, Kaufman wrote a version of the script with Spock as the main character, with a Klingon arch-nemesis to be played by the legendary Toshiro Mifune. As a big fan of Akira Kurosawa movies, this concept certainly sounds cool to me at least. Two key concept artists were also brought onto the project, famed James Bond production designer Ken Adam and Ralph McQuarrie, who at the time had just completed concept art for Star Wars. Together they developed a number of designs and concept, including a refitted Enterprise with a flat triangular drive section, something which later inspired the design of the Crossfield class starship in Star Trek Discovery. Despite initial progress, however, script difficulties caused the project to stall once again. After years of development, Paramount decided to cancel their Star Trek movie, 3 months before the release of Star Wars. Instead, executive Barry Diller convinced Roddenberry to restart development of a new Star Trek as a TV show entitled Star Trek Phase 2. It was to be the flagship show of a new Paramount television network. Producer Harold Livingston, who would later go on to work on several Star Trek TV shows, was brought on to assemble the show's writer's room. Of the cast, only Leonard Nimoy refused to return for fear of typecasting. A new, younger Vulcan character named Zon was created, played by Daniel Gautreaux. For a new first officer, Roddenberry created Commander William Decker, and as a new navigator, he created Lieutenant Ilea. The pilot episode, In Thy Image, was loosely based on Roddenberry's initial movie pitch, The God Thing. Alan Dean Foster, who would later write Star Wars, Splinter of the Mind's Eye, and many other novelized Star Trek and Star Wars books, worked with Harold Livingston to create the two-part episode. The script was extremely well received by Michael Eisner, who was CEO of Paramount Pictures at the time. He proclaimed it was worthy of a movie. By 1978, however, the monumental success of Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind convinced Paramount that Star Trek could be the next big science fiction hit. Just 2 weeks before the production of Phase 2 was set to start, Paramount cancelled the series in favour of making a feature film. Leonard Nimoy eventually agreed to return as Spock after fan outcry that the character would be absent. Daniel Gautreaux was recast in the eventual movie as Commander Branch. Stephen Collins was cast as William Decker, and Persis Kambata joined as Ilea. Star Trek the Motion Picture was announced in March 1978 during a massive press conference. Director Robert Wise, an Academy Award winner known for The Haunting, West Side Story, and The Day the Earth Stood Still, was brought on as director. On an initial budget of $15 million, the movie was at last green-lit. Filming began on August 7th, 1978. Despite the initial enthusiasm, difficulties soon arose surrounding the script. Harold Livingston and Robert Wise had clashed with Roddenberry several times throughout development of the story, and Livingston continued writing the script even after shooting was started.
We had 2 acts of a 3-act screenplay. Literally, we had 2 acts of a 3-act screenplay.
In order to make the release date that they wanted at the end of the year, we had to start shooting on the film before we had a final script all the way through.
Livingston at one point even called the story unworkable. Quote, "We had a marvellous antagonist, so omnipotent that for us to defeat it, or even communicate with it, or have any kind of relationship with it, made the initial concept of the story false. Here's this gigantic machine 1,000,000 years further advanced than we are. Now, how the hell can we possibly deal with this? On what level? As the story developed, everything worked until the very end. How do you resolve this thing? If humans can defeat this marvellous machine, it's really not so great, is it? Or if it is really great, will we like those humans who defeat it? Should they defeat it? Who is the hero anyway?" That was the problem. We experimented with all kinds of approaches. We didn't know what to do with the ending. We always ended up hitting a blank wall. End quote. The difficulties with the script concerned many of the actors who ended up contributing much of their own character material. Shatner often described the ending as a jigsaw puzzle. Pages of the script were not only being rewritten daily, but even hourly. It's estimated that of the original 150 pages of the screenplay, only 20 survived until the end of filming. Post-production also brought its share of difficulties. Star Wars and Close Encounters had massively raised the standard of visual effects in major films, and Paramount wanted to make sure their Star Trek movie was up to scratch. They first approached Douglas Trumbull, famed for his incredible work on Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. However, Trumbull was busy with other projects. Next, they went to John Dykstra, who had supervised the effects on Star Wars and created the revolutionary DykstraFlex motion control camera system. He too was unavailable. Eventually, Paramount settled on Robert Abel and Associates, known at the time for their pioneering work using digital visual effects. However, they were mostly known for television work, mostly commercials. They initially budgeted their VFX at $4 million, but as they began the work, it was clear they had underestimated the scale of the project and had to increase their estimates to $5 million. After a year of work, however, no one was satisfied with the finished shots. Abel and Associates was fired from the film. With a year of work and $5 million wasted, Paramount quickly approached Trumbull again as soon as he was available. With an extremely tight schedule and looming Christmas deadline, Paramount essentially gave Trumbull a blank check to get the VFX completed in time for release. After months of back-breaking work, the VFX were completed on time. For the film's score, Robert Wise had worked with composer Jerry Goldsmith on his previous film The Sand Pebbles, and was delighted when Paramount suggested him for the job. Roddenberry had previously approached Goldsmith to score The Cage, the original pilot for the Star Trek TV series, but was unavailable at the time. Goldsmith has since described his experience on Star Trek the Motion Picture as one of the best he has ever had. Goldsmith's influences were largely romantic and wanted to convey a sense of sweeping adventure. His first stab at scoring the film was ultimately rejected by Robert Wise.
I listened to the first couple of pieces and it didn't seem quite right to me. It seemed like I got visions of sailing ships somehow.
The scene of the flying up to the Enterprise was a big bombastic piece, and we all thought it was so wonderful. And to finish the sessions, and I'm patting myself on the back, and everybody's patting, it's great and all that. And he couldn't really articulate what was bothering him. He instinctually knew what was bothering him, but he couldn't say what was bothering him. So I said, we got to do that all over again. And so I was crushed.
Those were pretty frightening moments. Those are the type of moments where if you were going to start having a breakdown, that's when you were going to start doing it.
I said, well, what's bothering you? And he finally said, there's no theme. And I started thinking, theme? Oh. There's a love theme. I'd written a love theme. But I mean, there was no Star Trek theme. I said, oh.
Yeah, when we took a little break and Jerry went away, and while we were doing some more work on the film, and then he came back with his revised score.
He'd come over to the house. And he had a bad day of the special effects, and he says, I've had a really bad day today. He says, nothing's working right. I hope you got good news for me. So I remember the head of the music department at Fox, at Paramount, was there then. And we had rehearsed this, and I had two pianos in the living room, and we played it for him on the two pianos. That's it. It was like, why didn't you come up with that in the first place?
Another key element to the score was the blaster bar, created by musician Craig Huxley. A 12 to 15 foot long metal beam with long wires connected to amplifiers and played with an artillery shell. Goldsmith thought it was perfect for the otherworldly sounds of V'ger and featured it prominently in the score. While the scoring process was relatively relaxed, the mad dash to finish the film meant it was completed less than a week before its national release. After its troubled filming and post-production, the budget had swelled from $15 million to $26 million. When the development costs of the other film concepts in Phase 2 was factored in, Paramount had spent a collective $44 million on the movie, a massive sum at the time. But at last, Star Trek the Motion Picture was ready for release on December 7th, 1979. Like all things Star Trek, the motion picture carries a lot of nostalgia for me personally. I compulsively watched it as a child, awestruck by the visuals and swept along by the music. It was only as I entered my teens and started browsing internet fan sites that I discovered the controversial status of the film for many Trekkies. Viewing it today as an adult, it's not a movie which I dislike, but it's certainly one which earns its acquired taste. The motion picture has often been nicknamed the slow motion picture. After the fast-paced fisticuffs and phaser fights of the TV show, it must have been quite strange for fans at the time to be greeted with such a slow-feeling film. The movie is only just over 2 hours long, but it feels a lot longer while watching. The hastily delivered VFX shots often meant they were left in the edit in their entirety instead of being trimmed down. This results in scenes like the 5-minute long sequence of Kirk merely approaching the Enterprise in a shuttlecraft. There's very little in the film to really get the blood pumping. It takes almost 40 minutes of runtime until the Enterprise crew are finally all together to confront the approaching anomaly. However, I think a lot of this is due to some script issues as well. The charming banter between Kirk, Spock and McCoy doesn't really appear in the movie like it should. The only real relationship we have to invest in is between Decker and Ilea. And while the actors do a good job with what they're given, it's pretty thin material overall. Kirk actually comes off quite badly in the film. He pretty much wrestles control of the Enterprise away from its new captain for quite selfish reasons and makes numerous mistakes when it comes to ship operations. The production design may also play a part in the slow and sometimes dull feeling of the film. The original show was extremely colourful with bright uniforms and interiors. In the motion picture, however, a lot of that colour has vanished. The Enterprise interiors are all grey or silver, and the uniforms have turned into dull blues, greys, and beiges. Matt Jeffries, the original designer of the Enterprise, was extremely disappointed by the redesigns in the film, and says he even fell asleep while watching it. The visual effects work is mostly outstanding, save for a few nitpicks here and there. The matte painting on Vulcan, for example, doesn't really work. It's a messy design which fails to draw the eye and doesn't seem to really match the live-action footage. When the film goes into space, however, the effects truly shine. This is quite simply one of the most visually spectacular movies I have ever personally seen. The miniature work here is virtually flawless. While we could quibble about a few matte lines here and there, the Enterprise and other ships are incredibly detailed and lifelike. The optical work in creating the V'ger cloud is some of the best which has ever been done in a movie. Looking at it today, you would assume a lot of it is done in a computer, and it racks the brain to think how it was done with the processes at the time. While the effects work doesn't quite match the standard of Trumbull's work on 2001: A Space Odyssey, it easily matches and in some cases surpasses the work done on Star Wars and Close Encounters. Many years later, Robert Wise was able to tweak the film slightly in his director's cut, and the weaker effects were largely improved. The Vulcan sequence really works now, and other matte paintings have been improved. If you've only ever seen the original theatrical cut, I would highly recommend this version, as it fixes some other issues as well. Jerry Goldsmith's score is one of, if not his best scores ever. I put it in the top spot of my top 10 sci-fi movie soundtracks, but even outside that genre, the work is astounding. Goldsmith earned well-deserved Oscar, Grammy, and Nebula Award nominations, and it's a shame he didn't win them. His iconic central theme weaves its way into the brain and remains there pretty much for forever. But outside of that, the intricate work on V'ger and his use of blaster bar runs the gamut of existential terror and cathartic relief by the film's climax. It's a score which is on a permanent rotation in my playlist. It's simply brilliant. As someone with a love for spaceships and alien vistas, there is a part of me which is able to get swept up in the rhythm of Star Trek the Motion Picture. It doesn't really bother me that the dry dock sequence is 5 minutes long. The technical craft which is being both seen and heard is enough to keep my attention for much of the film. And for a film with such a messy script, the ending is truly inspired. The revelation of V'Ger as Voyager 6, Earth's own satellite lost and modified by a race of artificial beings, is brilliant. The themes surrounding the meaning of life, the search for a purpose, and rebirth into a higher life form hits the right balance of being both cosmic in scale, but also deeply personal and relatable. While much of the film's character work is lacking, this climactic scene really brings it all together and hits the bullseye. The journey to get to this point is certainly uneven and dull, but in my estimation, the wait is well worth it. That being said though, it's probably accurate to say the plot was much too thin for the length of the film. This is another issue somewhat remedied in the later director's cut, and numerous fan edits over the years have done a good job of speeding up the pace to make a solid 1 hour 40-minute movie. Despite its flaws, however, for me personally, this is still an enjoyable film. Its themes are fascinating and technical achievements astonishing. Even if it becomes a real slog at various points, it's not a film I could ever truly dislike. The release of Star Trek the Motion Picture was a highly anticipated one, but unfortunately the film met with a mixed reception to say the least. Many critics took issue with its slow pace and messy script. The fan reception was similarly divided. After so many years waiting to see Star Trek return, many were very disappointed by its big screen debut. The cast and crew were also quite disappointed, feeling the motion picture lacked the heart of Star Trek.
Here's the ship going this way. Here's the ship going that way. Here's the ship coming toward us. Where's the story?
Its box office was also a bit of a letdown. While the film did go on to gross $140 million worldwide, compared to the contemporary blockbusters Paramount was looking to match, Star Trek the Motion Picture failed to meet expectations. Once again, the future of the Star Trek franchise was in doubt. While the box office results weren't what Paramount wanted, they acknowledged there was an audience out there who would be keen to see Kirk, Spock and McCoy in another, albeit cheaper, big screen adventure. By the next decade, the next installment would be the real make or break moment for Star Trek. Thanks for watching. If you like what I do and want to see more videos, subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay up to date on all my new uploads. If you like what I do and want to help the channel grow, join me over on my Patreon where you can see videos like this early. Speaking of which, I'd like to quickly thank all of my patrons who are now appearing on screen. Have a good one, and as always, live long and prosper.